Hello, my name is Azhley Baker, and I am the Disaster Recovery Engineer here at Involta. And today we're going to talk about SLA profiles and different retention options you can configure when creating a protection group in Cloud Director Availability. So here I've started to create a new protection job. I'm at the settings page right now, and this is where it's going to ask you which SLA profile you'd like to use or how you'd like to configure your options if you want to do this manually. So you can see here, I have 4 SLA profile options available to me. These can change because we do update these based on best practices from VMware. The biggest difference between them is just how far back the retention goes. So 1 day, 3 day, 5 day, 7 day. When deciding on which retention policy you want to keep in mind the farther back it goes, so 7 days is the farthest back we have as a SLA profile option. That will use more storage just because that's more data that it needs to save. Whereas if you've got 1 day, that's less storage compared to 7 days. And reasons you'd want to pick one or the other is you just want to think about what kind of disaster you're specifically trying to plan for, right? If you're thinking about, I'm really worried about a cyber attack, some sort of ransomware event, the more options you have, the farther back you can go. That tends to be better. In my experience, I've seen attackers trigger that sort of thing on, say, a long weekend, maybe the Friday before, 4th of July or something. So if they trigger it on a Friday and you're not back in the office until Tuesday, well, hopefully your monitoring systems would catch it before Tuesday, but worst case scenario, it didn't. It's good to have retention points going back to that Friday before. So that's, 3 or 4 days of retention time you'd want. Your 5-day policy would most likely cover that. 7 days, a little more overkill, but it's never bad to have options. 3 days would also cover most events. If you had good monitoring systems in place, you could probably catch it pretty fast, even within 1 day. But it's just all about what kind of options you want to have and how much storage you want to be able to use. Or if, I'm not really worried about that, got other things in place to protect against a ransomware event, or, we don't think we want to have that in our DR plan. Maybe you're just worried about if, say, a fire broke out in the data center and the equipment's toast, right? In that case, you're probably fine with the 1 day, or you want to cut back on storage costs a little bit. You don't even want a whole day of retention. You can come in here and just disable the retention policy, and this will just keep the 1 point in time as an option. So if everything just went down because it caught fire, you'd have 1 retention point to pick from. You'd just fail over to that point in time, and you'd be good to go. So lots of flexibility here. Beyond the retention policy, we also have RPO, your target RPO. This is important because this will be effectively your most recent retention point. How far back do you want it to be? So if you set it to 1 hour, which I find is a good sweet spot, CDA will try to always have a retention point available from within the last hour. If I set it to 30 minutes, it's always going to try to have a retention point from within the last 30 minutes. And then after it has this target RPO configured, that retention point saved, that's beyond that is when the retention policy comes into play. And this will make a little more sense when I illustrate it with one of my already created replication groups here in a moment. So beyond that, you also have a few other options when we scroll down. There is quiescing as an option. If you're familiar with VMware snapshots, you're probably familiar with VMware's quiescing option. I do not recommend turning this on when configuring it for CDA just because of how often it would need to do this. It can cause a stun to your virtual machine if you do this option. If you have it off, then CDA has no effect on your running virtual machine. So I usually leave this off. All of the SLA profiles you choose from have it off, but it is there. Should that be something you want? Compressed replication traffic. This can be used if something that you're trying to replicate is having trouble meeting that target RPO. Maybe the bandwidth just is a little tight and you need a little help getting that data across. This will compress it, but it will use some CPU when it's doing that. So pros and cons, pros and cons. And then delay start synchronization. This would be if maybe you don't have a whole lot of bandwidth from your source site and you want it to start after the workday. Well, I can come in here and configure the replication policy, but it's not going to start replicating until, say 6 p.m. on Friday, right? So that's what you might want to use that for. Uh, Again, not usually needed, but it is there. VDC policy settings, you could ignore these. It's not something that we use here at Involta right now. And then excluding disks, this can be useful if there's a disk attached to, say, a SQL server with some log files. Maybe you don't need that one replicated, you can exclude it. Or you can configure a seed VM if maybe you have a really, really large virtual machine and you also have backups coming to one of our data centers. We can do a restore of that virtual machine and then use it as a seed VM to speed up the CDA replication process. And that's what that option would be used for, should you need it. So that is what those look like. To illustrate, I'm going to cancel out of that. And this is a virtual machine that I've had replicating for more than a day now. And it's got the 1-day SLA profile. So if I come to the instances view here, it's going to show me all of the instances that I have available to pick from if I wanted to fail over. We can see this one right here is the most recent instance, it's the latest one. That one is going to be following the RPO I have set. So I have a 1-hour RPO on this one. 10:03, well, right now it is 10:30. So that is within the last hour. That's looking good. And then beyond that, the 1-day policy has 6 hours. Every 6 hours after that is where it'll keep a retention point. So we've got 6 a.m., midnight, 6 p.m., noon. You can see about 6 hours is where it spreads those apart. It'll also tell you how big was the delta on that and how long did it take to transfer. So this is pretty small and the transfers were pretty quick. And those are the SLA profile options that you have in Cloud Director Availability, as well as some information on the retention and different options you can set for creating these retention points. If you have any questions, definitely let us know. Otherwise, follow along for more videos. Thank you.